So my name is Caitlin Goodekunst. I lead marketing and business development at Creativity. And along with JP Stoops, who is going to come on at the end and help moderate some of the discussion, we co-founded Digital Kids in its current iteration. We founded the group coming up from two other meetup groups that had been existing. One that was focused on mobile apps for kids, and the other that JP had founded with a partner that was focused on smart toys. And our feeling with the industry and the state of play today was that kids don't really see different mediums in the same way that we as executives or researchers or designers might discuss that. They just think about play. And so digital has become such an integrated facet of play for kids these days that we don't think just physical toys or mobile apps or different types of streams. Kids are just playing with a lot of different types of products. So we want to be able to cover topics that relate to all of those types of digital products, whether it's smart toys or voice-first apps or mobile apps, or even just the design and the research best practice or the online safety that goes into those. So those are the type of topics that we touch on in this meetup group. We are social. We really want to build a community. So we invite everybody to give us topics, to volunteer, to host some great content, just like Megan has. We're really excited to kick off her presentation and to see how together we can lift up the industry and retain the best talent and make the best products for kids. This is our third meetup group. It was meant to be in March, but we turned it into a virtual event. So it's our first webinar. And again, that's really exciting because now we can record it, make it available online, and include more people than ever before. So with that, just a few housekeeping things. We're going to keep everybody on mute for the duration of Megan's presentation. At the end, we'll have a Q&A. So if you have questions, please do put those in the chat or hang on to them. There is a raise hand function once we get to the Q&A portion if you'd like to voice your question out loud. And then after a few questions, we'll also try and open this up and see if mass chaos does not ensue, and we can kind of have a fun roundtable discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Megan Boddum and kick off our really exciting topic about how the best practices for children's UX research. Thank you.
Okay, Caitlin, let me know when I'm all ready to go. Good. Okay. So firstly, I want to welcome everyone. I wish we could all be together in person, but I'm so glad we're able to do this virtually. I love sharing with people what I do, so I'm really excited to talk about my experiences today. So the first thing I want to go over real quickly is just how the session will go. So we're going to first talk a little bit about my background and experience. Then we'll go into a high-level look at the role of a kids user researcher. And then I'm going to walk you guys through 3 case studies. So looking at common research stories relevant to the kids product space. And then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion if time permits. And like Caitlin said before, if you could just ask your question in the chat box, we will be happy to start, chatting about things we talked about today. There will be short video clips in this presentation, so make sure when I play them, your volume's up. And if there's any tech issues, I apologize in advance, but I think we should be good. So I wanted to note that videos and photos in this presentation are released just for educational and presentation purposes. So please don't share or screenshot anything in this presentation. I will send out updated slides to people if they would like that. So just let me know if you would want some of those. And we will be recording this, so if you know anybody who want to watch it, you can share that out and contact me for slides. All right, so let's jump in. I just wanted to show you guys a high-level roadmap of my professional journey in a visual format. So I was born and raised in the Bay Area, and I graduated with a BA in sociology. And when I was figuring out what was next, I took an intern role at Leapfrog Toys. And this is where I first discovered this intersection of kids and research and toys and creative, creative environment. And I really got hooked. From there, I took a brief little hiatus in program management at Sylvan Learning Center. But my time there, I really realized that I wanted to get back into kids research. So I went back and got my master's in early childhood education. And since then, I've been working in the kids research media space. And I've worked at places such as WestEd. I worked for a small company called Komochi's Social Emotional Toys. I then went to be the director of education for Fingerprint Digital, which is a small startup that builds custom app solutions and spaces for different companies. I then went on to be a researcher for YouTube Kids. And after that, I went to a small robotics and AI company to oversee all the research for a little product called Cosmo. And we're going to dive into Cosmo in just a second. And then from there, I went over to Square Panda to work on their research team. And now I am currently freelancing and consulting for various companies. So that's just sort of a high level of how I got to where I am. And I just wanted to show you some pictures of, snapshots of me in action here. I have over 10 years of experience working with kids in user research. I've worked on a variety of products and media types, and I've worked with kids and families and teachers. So just some visuals of my experiences here. And then these are some big products I oversaw some of the research for. So I worked on the Leapster. That was the first product I worked on when I was working as an intern at Leapfrog. I then went to work on Playaway Launchpad, which was this standalone curated device for libraries that had apps and games, and it was curated by age and learning subject. I then went to Samsung Kids and helped launch this app for all the Samsung products, and then to YouTube Kids on the bottom with the streaming video, then on to Cosmo and Square Panda. So before we dive in, I want to play a clip from one of my favorite movies, which I really feel like will set the stage for what I'm going to talk about today.
Transformers, 37% market share, and that we are targeting the same area. I think that we should see 1/4 of that, and that is 1/5 of the total revenue from all of last year. Questions? No.
Not for me.
Yes? Yes?
I don't get it.
What exactly don't you get?
It turns from a building into a robot, right?
Precisely.
Well, what's fun about that?
I love that clip because I feel like no matter what world we come from, research, product development, education, parenting, whatever sphere we're in, I feel like we can relate to the Tom Hanks character. So as a kids user research, I have been in countless rooms just like this, representing the voice of the user, in this case, the child. So as a kids researcher, my role is to really ask the question, is this really fun? Do kids understand and relate to this? Okay, so now let's start with looking at like high-level user experience research, like what purpose it serves. So people spend a lot of time, money, and resources building products, but what we must understand is that people are going to use things how they want and what's intuitive to them, oftentimes, very differently from what we expected by initial design. And I feel like this picture beautifully shows that. And some of the best products for adults and children start with a really strong user research component. So now let's look a little more in detail on what a kids user researcher role entails. So as a researcher, a big part of my role is to listen to all the teams and key stakeholders that I'm working closely with. To come up with research questions and methodology that can help provide answers and insight to allow them to do their jobs much better. So for example, here you see a question from a UX designer would be, compared to our current user interface with this updated design direction, where are kids having user navigation issues and or successes? And then on the other hand, an engineering lead, which might just want to know which navigation direction or in number of categories should we start building out? So you really are working with a variety of people. So for today, the presentation, when it comes to covering best practices and methodology, product impact, delivering findings, etc., I want to discuss these big ideas by walking you through various case study examples from my diverse experiences. I feel like this is just a much more fun and interactive way of looking at these big ideas. So with all my experiences, the 3 common research stories I want to highlight by walking you through some case studies. So the first one is this idea of, there's a lot of noise, background noise. Okay. So the first one is this idea of trend spotting and ongoing observations. So your role as the researcher is to always be picking up on trends happening in the lab and bringing them to teams' attention, even in times when they don't align with business goals and product development, roadmap, etc. So that's the first story I will cover. The second one is this idea of co-design with kids and how valuable this process can be to successful product development and business decision making. And the last one is this idea of incorporating kids' feedback early on. So how important it is for getting kids' feedback early on in the creative development process, in particular when it comes to character development. So these are the 3 stories I'm going to walk you guys through. So here's the first story, this idea of, always being a constant observer and looking for trends. And I'm going to highlight this with the development of a feature we built for Cosmo, which is a little robot. So before we jump in, I want everybody to understand what this product's all about. So that's Cosmo. So with my time working with Cosmo, I saw many ongoing themes in the labs, these play patterns that happen time and time again. So kids wanted to be able to control Cosmo to do what they wanted, user-directed. They wanted to make Cosmo have specific animation, sounds, and say funny words, these short cause and effect moments. And they wanted to participate in like sandbox play where there was no prescribed way to play, like endless possibilities. So the first feature I saw kids drawn to was this feature called Explorer Mode with Cosmo. So time and time again, they would come into the lab and this was what they wanted to play first. So let's look real quickly at this feature. So Explorer Mode was extremely popular among kids because it was user-directed and provided this open play experience with endless possibilities. So we saw kids play with it all the time. The next play pattern I saw over and over was the kids were accessing this feature called Code Lab to play with animations and actions. So in partnership with Scratch out of MIT, Code Lab was a feature we launched where the user could learn to code by programming the robot to perform specific tasks. And what we saw, well, let's look at Code Lab real fast. So what we started to see in the lab is kids were coming in with Code Lab, but they weren't choosing to play with Code Lab because they wanted to code. They wanted to access these action and animation options on the bottom you see here. And it was because there was no other place in the app or even playing with the product where the user could choose the animation of Cosmo. That was always prescribed based on their character. So what I saw was kids would go in here and they wouldn't even move the tabs around. They would just click on the animations. And the last thing I was observing were kids returning to this feature called Cosmo Says every time and time again. And this was basically the idea that you could type in any words for Cosmo to say, and they would say it. So I continue to ask myself the question, like, how can we develop a new feature inspired by these ongoing observations of ways kids are organically playing and interacting with Cosmo that feels fresh and new? And then Cosmo Performs was born. Let's watch this real quickly. So as you can see, these 3 emerging play patterns were all combined into this new feature. So kids can control what Cosmo says and how he animates in a fun story making experience. So let's look back at how we got from this feature inspiration to this final deliverable of Cosmo Performs. So the initial research need for this was we needed to gain insight into how to best create this new feature that builds upon common play patterns. And at the same time, we needed to serve up something that was fresh and new and didn't seem like the experience they were already playing with Cosmo. And the big research question was like, what did kids want to see? How did they want us to serve this up to them? What kind of narrative and UI experience would they want most? And the research justification was there was a lot of company attention at that time on what new feature we were going to build. So we needed to make sure development went through different rounds of iterative testing. And the big research challenge was, how are we going to develop a feature that's centered on these ongoing play patterns and at the same time aligned well with character development, business direction, and keeping in mind the teams had this real fear of Cosmo becoming a remote control robot instead of something that was driven by character. So getting to the final feature took different rounds of iterative testing. I looked at various prototypes, but really listening to kids' feedback and observing how they're interacting with the feature during different stages of development was really prioritized, and it ultimately aided in us making a feature that new and current users loved. So let's look at the 4 stages of development. I just want to point out how we got to where we landed. So we first started out with this piano concept, and this is the idea that all the actions and animations up top are curated by these tabs, and the user would drag whatever they chose down to these little blocks on the bottom, and those would be, they would make a playlist of either emotions, animations, actions. And we have some interesting findings from kid testing on this round. So kids did not like navigating these multiple tabs and wanted to see all options visually in one place. Having pictures of Cosmo's face mimicking animations wasn't resonating with kids. And some kids were overwhelmed by the amount of spaces to fill. And this dragging mechanic was really hard for kids. So kids would drag it down, and halfway their finger would, come off the screen, and it was really frustrating for them. And kids wanted a more motivating narrative experience. This piano concept was not cool enough for them. So we iterated and we came up with our next design, and that was called the DJ booth concept. So you can see here, we updated this and we presented all animation options with individual icons in one place. So kids liked this so much better, but we still saw them having trouble navigating. We presented less option choices, which was way more manageable for kids. We just told dragging mechanics, so we prompted them to drag to this record player, but we still saw kids having trouble. And kids did not notice this whole say option where you could type in a word for Cosmo to say. So we needed to figure out how to bring that more up to the surface for them to figure out. And so we tried to find this cool factor with the music narrative, but some kids weren't familiar with DJ booths or excited by it. So our team had to sort of regroup and figure out what we were going to do next. And the third design iteration is this playlist option. So we see here that we use color coding to help distinguish the animation categories. So for example, the purple tiles were the emotions, and this was super helpful for the kids to navigate all those options. Instead of having the user drag, we implemented a button to tap to add. It worked better, but some kids still miss noticing that button. And we added some sample word options for kids to choose from. It just sort of like prompted them to check out like, oh, what's this all about? And kids were way more familiar with creating a playlist, but it still didn't read as exciting and motivating to them. So we came up with another iteration of this design, and we called it the storytelling concept. You could see here, the images were cut off on the bottom here, so kids knew instinctually to scroll up and down, so we didn't need a scroll button, so that was great. We added a way for kids to edit their playlist, their story playlist. And oh yeah, kids thought it was really fun that they could design a story with animations and words for Cosmo to perform. And we added the play icon read well, so we didn't need a title there. Okay, so then we got to our final design, and here's Cosmo Performs. So you can see it's just overall design polish. We added this plus button on the bottom. It was easier for kids to not navigate a whole other button. And a direct, simple prompt worked really great. Like, we just tell the kid exactly what we need them to do, and they did it every time. And the final feature name was directly influenced by kids. So in the previous design, kids kept mentioning they love performing with Cosmo, and we thought, hey, why don't we just take directly their idea and incorporate it into the name? So it was a team effort, and we were able to create a feature that allowed these two modalities of character and user choice to coexist in a very user-friendly way. So let's look real quickly at, this is a test I did in a lab when we were at a final design. And I just want to keep in mind that this kid is on the older end and a big gamer. So this was going to be a challenge. And you can see in my facial expressions that I'm pretty excited when we get it right.
Yeah, I actually think this is pretty cool.
So really exciting that we got it right. All the hard work made the feature really successful. So now I want to move on to this second story that I want to highlight. And this is touching more on user-driven product development. So I want to really highlight the importance of co-design with kids. So while I was working as a user researcher at YouTube Kids, I worked closely on this initiative called Age Up. And this initiative addressed this issue we were continually seeing with our users, that the kids were jumping ship from the YouTube Kids app way earlier than we wanted to, and they were going to the main app. And there was a lot of concerns with this. First and foremost, privacy and safety. They were being exposed to all available content. And also some of them were using their parent profiles, and they weren't in this sort of parent-controlled environment that, hopefully the app, that was the big draw to it. So this was the big issue. And so the research need here was, we were seeing many users drop from the Kids app and jump to the main app too early. So we needed to explore, like, what updates would kids inside this main app longer? Research question, aside from making all content available, which was not an option, what updates got kids excited about staying in the app longer? And this research justification. So at an organization like YouTube with the volume of users, small changes can make a really big difference to overall product and user base. So it's vital to come at changes from all research angles and really prioritize that user feedback. And so the big research challenge here was, how are we going to capture the feedback we needed during our one-on-one usability sessions that we ran almost every day? We needed a larger group of users. We needed time to run alternative methodology and look at kids' attitudes over a longer period of time. And that's when I created YouTube Kids Design Crew. So this was a co-design group, was a group of active YouTube Kids users. So we needed the users that were normally dropping at this age. And they were partaking in recurring monthly focus groups where they shared ideas, participated in co-design activities, and worked directly with different team members on different ideas we had, exploring new concepts and so forth. So what benefits did this group have outside of regular daily kid testing? So it really built team investment and involvement. It really strengthened our overall culture and communications. And it allowed this time and space to facilitate hands-on co-design activities where kids could creatively express and share their thoughts. And a lot of new feature ideas, design directions, and product interactions emerged organically in these groups. And it also, surprisingly, we didn't predict this to happen. It really yielded these unique marketing materials and PR moments for the team. So let's look at these big ideas. So this idea of team involvement and investment. So these groups were large. They were about 10 to 12 kids, so I would always need support on running them. And you could see here that team members had to actually step in and run some research at different stations. And so you can see here on the left, this was one of our lead designers, and she was running testing on different ways she could visually express episodic content to kids. So she was really hands-on, and she got so much more insight out of being hands-on with the kids than she would have even from a report or a video. So team members started to really love these sessions. You can see over here on the right, this is one of our engineers, and she was working on these different search options for kids. So she was testing out all these ideas she had, which really helped her narrow down to where we got to. And we created this environment where it fostered all these great new ideas, design directions, and all these hands-on creative projects. And so I'm going to walk you through a couple of these examples. So one of the features our team was considering for, this Age Up initiative was implementing this idea of monthly content themes and takeovers. So we wanted to get ideas from kids about what themes they would like to see. And so what we did is we handed them these blank home pages and we said, we want you to design your very own content takeover home screen. Use your imagination and design it however you would like. And we asked follow-up questions of what would it look like? What special things would you want to see? What holidays or themes would you want to include? And some really interesting themes emerged. So we see here, kids wanted elements of personalization and customization. So these are 4 examples of what kids designed. So on the left, top left, new content and surprises every day. Bottom right, background picture from a favorite movie. So they really wanted to be personal to them. And kids wanted to see topical and seasonal themes. So sports, back to school, winter holidays. It was really comforting to them. And of course, kids wanted elements of humor, action, and adventure. So another feature we worked on was considering this idea of incorporating profiles into the kids app, because we saw a big reason they were jumping ship was they wanted their own profile. They wanted to distinguish between their siblings, their friends. So we wanted to get a feel from kids about what elements they'd want to see in customization process for profiles. So I printed out every option a kid could want, and we asked them to design their profiles however they wanted with these materials to see what themes we saw emerge. So here's what we saw. Kids wanted a profile image that represented who they were. They wanted something unique to them, but they wanted to make sure that they could always change, updated at any time. So you can see here, these are 4 kids making a picture about me. I like girl stuff, so I'm making it really girly, which is definitely something we saw. I'm making a monster that looks like me. So it's always about them, back to self. Another theme was animals were still really popular in this 8+ age group. We didn't expect that, but it was definitely a theme that came through. And once again, kids wanted elements of humor and silliness in their profiles. So the great thing was that a lot of the features or the elements that kids highlighted in these in this activity were actually incorporated into the avatar making profile experience for YouTube Kids. So another idea the team was considering was this idea of topic of the day. So this was the idea that there would be a new surprise waiting every day for users when they open the app. So how did kids imagine seeing this concept incorporated in the app? So kids were given these large home screens, which was really fun for them, and asked how they would want to see this concept. And let's look at what happened. So we see that kids wanted to see elements of delight and surprise. So in the background, there will be a little present, and when I click on it, it's going to show me something I like or new for the day. So this was an 8-year-old boy that wanted to see that. So, kids want to see their favorite characters incorporated into the experience. So these two girls work together, and they wanted to see Nyan Cat is their favorite character. We want them to bring these little moments of joy and surprise. And once again, kids wanted to see elements of action and adventure. So it was really awesome to see that when designing how topic of the day would work, we could see the kid's voice make direct impact on product decisions. And then lastly, it just informed marketing and produced priceless PR moments. The kids got these cute little sweatshirts and they got to pose, and it was definitely used for marketing materials. So the last story I want to highlight for you guys is this idea of how I transferred my experience adapting methods for kids user research to the TV original space. So I want to look a little bit at programming. So while I was at YouTube Kids, I got the chance to run focus groups for originals in production. So here you see some pictures of kids watching a show. We were at a place where we had a rough cut of an episode. So people would always ask me, what's the best way to gauge if kids like this? How do you test this? Do you give them surveys, interviews? And really the simplest answer is you turn the show on, you play it for them, and you observe how they're watching the show. Kids will show you with facial expressions, when they laugh, when they don't laugh, like exactly what they think. There were times when we thought jokes would really land and no kid laughed in the room. We also thought, certain characters would appeal more and some others didn't. So it was really an interesting experience of just really a simple methodology told us the most. What I really want to talk about today is some of the research I did for a show that's called Not Too Late with Pam. And this is a show that's still in early production. And I got to work with the wonderful creators, Matt and Jen, on this, on some early research, getting feedback from kids. So just a high level description of what the show is about. It's about this funny, silly cat named Pam who loves books and reading and gets to host her own TV show. And her guests on her show are these storybook characters, which is really fun. And she gets to ask them questions, plays games, and the idea of the show is to be a fun experience for kids, but also to extend that love of reading from the TV to the home, which I thought was a really unique way of approaching this. So the research need here was they really wanted to get an early read on how kids respond to the show concept and characters. So this was the first time any kids saw these ideas and images. And so the big research questions were, what are kids' initial reactions to the show concept? And are they drawn to the characters? And is there anything we're missing when it comes to character representation? And this research justification. So producing media for kids is very expensive, and it's important to give feedback early on in the process to make sure you're on the right track. So the research challenge was big. So without having an episode to watch, limited on these assets, how was I going to get helpful feedback for the team? And from my experience working on various kids products, I've learned that, a really important thing to get feedback is on story, but mostly characters. So I'm going to dive a little bit more into that. So you can see here, this is a great image of the focus group with the kids. And what we did is we had to present the show concept in a visual way without having any, animations, footage. So we made these very detailed storyboards, and we actually had different people on the team act out a scene and pretend to be characters, which was really fun for the kids. It was the best we could do with what we had. And so that was really fun. And then we wanted to get some rich feedback on the characters. So let's meet the characters real quickly. So this is Pam. Pam is the host of the show. She has a lot of energy. She loves reading and she loves music. So she's a main character. Then we had Bo. So Bo is Pam's best friend sidekick. And he is sweet and calm. And a little silly, doesn't read much, and never knows who the characters are. But the characters of the storybook. And then there's Joe. So Joe works on the show as a stagehand, and Joe is someone who takes care of Pam and fixes problems. And here's Dolores. Dolores is the director of the show. She's the real boss, tells everybody what to do. And then we have Florence. Florence is the studio page. She means she's there to help people. She's very sarcastic, a little droll humor. So without having any video or animations of the characters, we just had still images. We needed to think of a creative way to show off the characters and get kids engaged. And so I thought it could be a fun idea if we blew up the characters in these life-size cardboard cutouts. It allowed the kids to open the narrative a little bit more and talk about what they liked, what they didn't like about the characters. And it was really different than just showing them an image on a screen or on a piece of paper. So that was really fun. And then we had kids fill out surveys about the characters. We could follow up on what they liked, what they didn't like. So from this testing, we had some really interesting character findings, which we weren't predicting. So Flo was designed to be this form of comic relief. Her droll humor really didn't land well with kids. It landed well with adults, and mostly the adults creating the characters. But kids weren't drawn to Flo at all, and really actually were turned off by Flo and was their least favorite character. So Flo was sort of this idea that we were looking at, sort of the Pixar moment where kids would react to Flo in one way and adults would think Flo is funny in a different way. So with this feedback, the team went back and tweaked Flo's character to appeal a little bit more to kids, but still have that edge for adults. And then Joe. So Joe was originally a minor character, but kids responded to Joe the best. Kids loved Joe. They loved how he was a helper, how he was friendly, and most of them picked him as their favorite. So the team, sort of thought, well, why don't we make Joe a little bit more prominent character? So that was something that we probably wouldn't have found out without doing this research. And then Pam. It was so important that Pam landed with kids since she was the main character. What we saw is that kids were really drawn to this idea that she was this punk rocker, androgynous tomboy, and they wanted that amped up even more. So, that was an element of her character that the team amped up a little bit more due to kids' feedback. So I just want to bring it full circle. I know I have 2 more minutes. So I hope by walking through these unique use cases, you're able to get a feel for what kids research is, how impactful it can be, and how you can approach it from different ways to get the kind of feedback you want. So we have this Cosmo Performs. This really highlighted the idea that as a researcher, you're a trend spotter, you're the voice of the user. And there's so many times when you have to be the voice of the user when it's not the popular decision or thing to say in a big room of people who are designing together. The YouTube Kids crew really highlighted co-design with kids and working together to create something. And Pam is this idea that incorporating kids' feedback really early, even when you don't think you have enough stuff to get the feedback you want, it's so vital to the success of a product or a show. So yeah, now I just want to, thanks for listening. This is super fun to talk about. I have my information here that I can send out in my updated slides if anybody wants to contact me. But I guess I just want to open it up now to JP for questions, discussion. I hope this sparks some sort of excitement among everybody.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Megan. That was fantastic. And thanks to everyone for all the great questions. I'll consolidate a few questions and ask you one here myself in a minute. But first, just wanted to ask everyone to drop your company name, if you're comfortable with it, and what your role is, or just your role, even if you're a parent, into the comments so we have a sense for who's here. I saw some great names that we've seen before. Joe at Playtable, and we have Class Hook here, as well as Shai from KidSafe. So thanks to everybody for coming. And Shai, you know, in the interest of giving him a plug there, and a question for you, Megan. What type of parental consent do you need to get from a parent when you're interviewing their kids? Is it a form? What is the age range? So I'll start with that question, and then please type any other questions into the comments, and I'll consolidate them and ask.
Sure, that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of factors that go into this. It's usually recording consent that we can record their kid's session or whatever we're working. And we usually have like two buckets. We have for internal uses. So for teams to watch footage, for, you know, basically anyone just in the company is going to be watching it. And then we have different media releases for marketing materials, videos. So there's sort of like really high level, there's those two buckets. And then every kid that is tested, you know, up to, you know, until legal age is their parent signing for them. And then sometimes parent will sign for both of their, like parent and the child, depending on, a lot of times parents are in the sessions. But yes, every age. And I just come at it like I want to be over, I want to get everything signed no matter what, just in case anything goes on. And then just being really careful with footage. And anytime I do find video or materials that our marketing team wants to use, even if the parent has signed that release, a lot of times they don't realize what they're signing. And I always contact them to make sure, like, hey, we're going to use this here, here, here. And of course, if they're not comfortable with it, I will not use it. So I hope that answers the question.
That does. That's perfect. Great. So looking at some of the other questions here, we've got Joe from Playtable. A question about empirically ranking your observations. And my question is, like, how do you avoid leading your teams to false negatives? So his question is, if each feature is given a 1 to 5 value and the observer decides how well that feature is understood or enjoyed, and then the observer marks. So how do you determine that? And how can you empirically track and then share with the team without a bias?
Yeah, that's a really big, big question. And I feel like working with kids, you know, a big difference with kids and adults is you can ask a kid for an opinion or a question about what they think. And a lot of times their feedback isn't always exactly what they feel. It's sometimes they're trying to please the researcher. They're trying to say what they want you to, what they expect you to, they think you want to hear. So when it comes to like what I report to teams, for kids, it's a lot about observations. Yes, I take, you know, their rankings of, you know, if it's, what did you think of this, you know, home screen? And they go, it's a 3 out of 5. A lot of that information isn't going to be helpful to the teams. So it's really digging into why they answered that, and also combining it with for example, I was doing a app redesign, and a big question we had was if kids wanted to scroll left to right or up and down. And observing the kids, they all had a much easier time scrolling left to right. It was just obvious. When asked their preference, they all said up and down. So that's a really good example of me making a judgment call and saying, listen, I always present the story, what happened, here are the findings. And then I think a big part of my role is to be there to sort of parse out all the information and sort of say, but listen, all the kids struggled. They said they liked it, but they struggled. And a lot of times that's when video really comes into play. There's such a difference between telling a team, here's what happened, here's the finding, and then them really seeing like, oh my gosh, look, 8 out of 8 struggled with that navigation.
Got it.
Very high level answer. There's a lot more to that, so I'm happy to talk with Joe more about that.
Great, that was great. And you spoke about 8 as an example of kids. What's a good number of kids to interview where you start to get statistically significant or results that you can make conclusions from?
That's a really great question. I get asked that a lot. I think it's what you're testing. So in the bucket of usability, so seeing, can kids navigate from a home screen to a certain game they want to play? I'm of the belief that if you have good recruiting where you're getting kids in that, fit all the buckets, you really can start to see, I know it sort of freaks people out sometimes, you can start to see really strong themes after about 6 kids, so 6 to 10 kids. I think with more exploratory research or even like naming research, you need a lot more data points to really get a good feel. I feel like every researcher I've talked to has a somewhat different answer for this question. But it really depends on what you're looking for. And then, there's always that big factor of how many resources you have, how much money you have for recruiting, what's a priority on the team's roadmap, and so forth. But it really depends on what outcomes you're looking for.
Okay, great. So around 6 or more, but it of course depends. Actually, It leads to a question when you said resources. Like what does a staff structure look like for a UX research team? How would you organize a UX research team? What's the workflow? What's the time frame? That's a question from Mei Jing.
Okay. So I think it really depends what environment you're in. So working on a UX research team at YouTube Kids was a whole different experience than working at a small startup. So, working at a bigger company, you usually have a couple senior researchers working on one product, and then you usually always have research assistants who help with tracking data, cutting video, greeting families, a lot of the time-consuming stuff that researchers, it takes up a lot of their roles. So, and you're always working with key stakeholders at these bigger companies, but you definitely have more resources, more people. You usually have an in-house recruiter, someone who you work closely with for the company who does all your recruiting. For smaller companies, like in a startup environment, which is a lot more of where my experience is, a lot of times as the senior researcher, you're doing everything. You're working on recruitment strategy. A lot of times we use third-party recruiters. You are greeting families. You're doing video. You're setting everything up. You're troubleshooting. You're also running all the research. So, the way you do things is a little differently. But ideally, it's great to have at least 1 or 2 researchers on the same big product just to run ideas by each other. A lot of times I'm paired with a more quantitative researcher, so I'm predominantly a qualitative researcher, and I think it's a really good dynamic to have that quant and qual combo. You can come at issues from different angles, and so that's also a great pairing. And then it's also great to have a research assistant who can help you with all the time-consuming stuff. But it really depends on your environment.
Okay, and a follow-up question from Scott. Was so how do you incentivize? What's a stipend for a child, and do you let them know about that stipend before or after testing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Incentives change no matter what environment you're in. So most of the time it's a cash incentive, ranging anywhere from I've done anywhere from $25 to $150, $175, depending on how much time you need, what environment you're in. Are you in a bigger company that has more resources? And the way I do it is the recruitment is directly to the parent. So the parent knows about the incentive, and if they want to share that with their kid, they can. If not, they won't. And sometimes it's, we use gift cards. Sometimes it's actual product that we can give away. So it really depends. And it really comes down to what area you're in, how urgent you need people to help, or recruits to come in, and then how much in your budget you have. A lot of times you don't have a lot for that. So it's figuring out, where those concessions are.
And what's been your best platform or channel for finding users, parents with kids?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. That's one of the hardest parts of our role, is figuring out, if we don't have a third-party recruiter, someone who we pay to do our recruitment, how do we find kids? And I've done it so many different ways. I've done Berkeley Parents Network. I've done Facebook moms groups that seemed to work really well at the last company I was at. Friends of friends, word of mouth. And the thing you have to keep in mind is you really want to keep your recruits as diverse as possible. A lot of times companies will filter the same round of kids time and time again, which is always great because you do always need last minute kids, but it's important to get a wide variety of kids. And so I've used sort of all strategies, and it's not an easy part of the job. And it also brings about this point of recruitment in the Bay Area tech bubble, and then the importance of doing research outside this area. As a researcher, you need to push that a lot. We, if we get kids testing here, that's great, but let's see how kids in different parts of the country are responding as well.
So true. Great. So you really have to put yourself out there, reach out to people on Facebook, ask your friends for favors, or maybe even try and get introductions to people from
a lot of times people, and I'm sure any other kids user researchers on this will understand, teams will come to you and say, I need 6 kids tomorrow to test this.
Right.
And it's a process to try to get them trained to, be asking me for requests, weeks ahead so I can plan.
Right.
So, yeah.
Great. Question from Michelle. When co-designing with kids in the same room looks very successful, have you had any successes with remote research given everything that's going on? And what was the age group?
I haven't done a ton of remote research. The only kind of research I've done is follow-up calls with kids who are using products in a beta program where they've had it in their home for a long period of time. It is definitely much, much more challenging. Having a kid live in a room is they're not distracted. They are really focused. When you're on a call with them at home, there's a lot of factors that come into play. The parent has to be there. They get distracted. I can't move things around for them. So I've only done remote research that way, but I've definitely been thinking a lot about it in the environment and where we are now, and approaching things a little bit differently. But it's not easy. I've never done co-design remote. I can imagine that's really difficult.
Perfect. These are some great questions. Keep them coming. And Caitlin, I'll invite you back in here in a minute and ask one more question, Megan, for you from me. You've talked about researching with some larger companies and some startups. So what if you're just a person with an idea and you don't have budget to develop prototypes? What advice would you have to get feedback on that idea, candid feedback, without leading somebody to a false negative?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I think is I always try to do or recommend to people is, a lot of time when people have ideas, they want to make a new video where kids create video together. Is really look at all the competitor products out there. Look at what is already happening. For example, like working with family friends or kids' friends to be like, let's look at these 4 apps that are looking at video making. Let's look at TikTok. Let's look at, anything else that's similar, and let's get a real feel for okay, what are the what are the parts of these experiences that are really resonating with kids? And I really feel like that's an easy first step. If you don't have resources to make prototypes for your ideas or concepts, it can really help you focus on what you're making and what's sort of missing in the market.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of a, before, when you're in the exploratory design. And then a lot of times, there's quick ways to make, quick prototypes. There's quick programs to use. Sometimes I'll mix different elements from different apps to try to, display the experience in a way that they'll understand. I did some testing on AR recently, and it was a lot of make it work moments with what I had. I had only partially working prototypes, so I had to sort of display how the other elements of this experience would work by using other product parts. So there's a lot of things you can do, but I think just being curious and, when you're talking to kids and just observing, like, what are they liking playing? What's cool to them? What's fun? I mean, I've been really into, my goddaughters love TikTok and they love Minecraft, and I've been playing with them recently a lot remotely. And so it's been really fun to sort of figure out what's really making them excited.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think you hit it head on in terms of asking what the kids are playing with today and observing them. And I think it's helpful. And I've led. The question was loaded because I've led users to the answers that I want to see. When in reality, it's better to start broad about the user's life, what they do, what apps they're playing with, and ask questions around your product, and eventually maybe get to your product. But I think if you start immediately with, do you like my product that makes your child smarter? Typically they're going to say, of course. And I think it's better to look at how the products they're using and how they're using them, what they like about them, before asking them about your own product.
Yeah, I think it's with kids, it's hard at first. You want to step in and help them when they're making mistakes or they're not using things correctly. And as a researcher, we really have to take that moment to step back and sort of let them struggle at times, or, really get a feel for, like, okay, what's actually happening here, and not, helping them along. I mean, there's definitely a time you step in, but that's a really big thing I try to teach people I'm working with is just try to keep your personal beliefs out of it. And just let the kid lead what's happening.
Perfect. Great. Well, we're at the 6 o'clock hour. I'm going to pause on questions for a moment and hand it to Caitlin to help wrap it up, but we'll stay on potentially for a little bit longer for anybody that wants to stay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Megan. That was an extremely illuminating talk. There was obviously a lot of questions about it, so we could definitely continue this conversation for a lot longer. Normally our format would allow for a good half hour, an hour of people to meet and talk at this point. So I know that we're at time and everybody has, things that they have to do, whether they're in a different time zone or they have kids to take care of. But if you want to stay on, I'd love to open this up and let people talk to each other. This is meant to be a meetup in a community group. So while we didn't get to all the questions, I'm really interested just to hear where you're coming from and what you're excited about for the future after this. Let's keep it positive. I think we heard a couple of really good examples of how products are evolving and how you have to adapt to them. But what are you thinking is the good that's going to come out of this? And again, you could come off mute if you'd like to, and this is voluntary. You don't have to, for sure. But anyone want to start? JP.
And feel free to drop off now if you do need to run, as some people have. But it's great to see faces. We've all been locked up here for more than a few weeks. But anybody want to chime in?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I would say that because there is the reality that we're in right now, technology in particular is playing a pretty big role in solving these new challenges for parents. And all of that definitely is going through some trial and error right now. You can see on social media, there's a huge backlash by parents saying, look, I'm overwhelmed as it is, just getting all the emails from the different teachers at my child's school. So I do think in terms of kids user research, there's a lot of opportunity right now to figure out what is going to actually work for parents, kids, and teachers alike. It's a very generic answer, but that's what's on my mind lately for sure. Can I just also mention, just kind of going back also to some of the themes about bias, because I think as researchers, I mean, this is what all researchers in every discipline, this is the number one thing that you're constantly up against, right, is reducing bias. And the one discipline or tool that I feel is appropriate is almost being Zen-like. And so what I know Megan and I have talked about this. I know Megan, I'm so proud to know her. But what we've talked about is how you can watch people who are new to the job, right? And one of the rookie mistakes, but everybody, even if you're experienced, you fall into it because it's just human nature, is, kid number 7 comes in and kids 1 through 6 have all answered a particular question a very specific way. And on that 7th kid, you ask the question, but in your mind, like you're already answering it for them. And so as much as possible, if you can stay in the moment, completely forget the past, you're in this moment right here, right now, and you have no idea. So empty mind, you have no idea what this kid is going to say, and just constantly making that your mantra. It makes the whole process much more alive for you as a professional, and it gives you actually better data, reducing bias, I think. So that's all I was going to say about that.
I've been doing. I'm Devi at. I'm at Freckle, and I've been working with kind of doing kids educational stuff and just kids advert games for like quite a while. And I've been doing some recent kid testing. And one thing I've kind of noticed that's really interesting is like older kids, when I've tested with them and when I'm showing them sort of user experience flows, showing them like new designs, sometimes they will put on their sort of designer hat rather than reacting. And I'm wondering if there's sort of tactics to keep them from sort of turning to you and giving you advice on design versus just react to this thing and tell me what you think of it. I've just noticed that subtly with certain personalities for kids. There's certain kids that like to just, kind of derail the sort of unbiased natural experience with the product.
So I do a lot of board game design and playtest. And one thing that I found to help with that is trying to make them couch their answers in "I feel like." And if you can get them to do that, it's more like it will drive them away from, well, how about we do this instead? Or what if it was this? It's better to try to get them to express their feelings, because that will often lead to the seed of the issue rather than a solution to the issue, which is really not their job to do.
Yeah. I really like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, that scenario is widely prevalent with adults as well. Just, people at work or whatever, I think we should do blah, 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 just product feedback in general. And so it's always just getting to the why and just trying to always ask, what, why do you want that? What problem does that solve? Depending on the age of the child. I love that idea of like stating in a feel statement.
Mm-hmm. And I love how Megan shared 3 different examples of different types of products. I know that there'll be a different approach based on what you're trying to solve for. I think also, given that this title is Digital Kids, we have the luxury with a lot of products to be able to iterate and test things quickly. So sometimes it's also just showing people there's a couple different ways to arrive at a solution. And sometimes you have to show the loud voice what they're looking for and prove that there are other ways to do it. And then test it with kids. Testing with kids is so important. That's what I found.
I thought it might be helpful if I share. I've done a lot of one-to-one testing with kids, and there's nothing like having a really
good verbal child. And oftentimes I would have that the verbal kids that I did invite them back more times than the rest, but eventually you get some diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the older tween that may be a little snarky in their responses to you. And I just keep looking at the body language and the facial expressions to try to find the information I'm looking for, where sometimes I may not get it verbally.
Mm-hmm.
Just some things that have worked for me.
Has anyone ever done any calibration at the beginning? So just to figure out what the specific tells are for that child?
I have one, but I'd love to hear what others have to say. I started adding a question, does your child take medicine? And if so, do they take ADHD meds? I had this one testing session where a child was moving around a lot, and I thought I had found the answer I was looking for. See, proof. And the child just wasn't on their meds that day. Just an isolated incident, but I'd be curious to hear what other people are looking for in terms of tells.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes if you, like with really young kids, I know we used to ask, like, tell me about your favorite toy, just to see how that particular kid lights up. And then it's like, now, listen, do you remember a toy that you used to love, but you're too old for it now? Just to see how they're, like disinterested, as a way to calibrate. Yeah, I know, but man, in recruitment, I've tried the whole thing of, I can't remember how it's been a while since I've done it, but phrase the question that basically tries to get a parent to admit to any special conditions for the child. And it's hard. It's really hard.
There were a couple questions around managing different personalities within the company. Some people are more qualitative, some people are more quantitative. My experience on this, and I'll open it up to anyone else, is to make sure everyone understands the objectives going into the research and try and focus it to like 3 things. Like, what are the 3 things we want to try and get out of this? Because so often everyone's like, oh, we're going to test all these things, and when you test everything, I think you're not able to really focus on what are those 1, 2, or 3 things that you're trying to solve for. And I do think that it is a combination of qualitative and quantitative, and it's good to have both those people around. And I think it's, as much as possible, you need to try and not listen for the answers that you're listening for, and keep your emotions out of it as much as possible, but also allow some kind of tracking mechanism to document what a request was, or whether somebody was happy or sad. So a good book that I recently read for, I think it's user testing. It's a terrible title, but it's called The Mom Test. It's from a startup founder, very quick read, and it speaks to different ways to ask questions and how to track them. And I was originally taking notes in just Word documents, and I'd end up with all these Word documents, like, oh, read the Word documents, it's all in there. And then people, I'm never reading that, I'm not watching the videos. And then the suggestion was to put the questions into Excel or Google Doc, and then with each user, go question by question as you go across, and just as they're typing, just do little things, have a little code, like a smiley face or an upside down face, or F for feature request, or R for like another code. So you create a bit of a code so that when you do finish the 7 interviews, you can very quickly look at that one question and the 7 responses. And if you see like 4 or 5 smiley faces or R's, you can pretty quickly qualitatively say to that quantitative person, hey, 4 out of 7 said this, versus shuffling through the 8 different Word docs. So that was just one learning that I had in a good book, The Mom Test.
I would love to follow that up with a similar process that we've had a lot of success with. Kind of like when, like, I'll end up building a script out based off of sort of a few things we want to learn. And the script is almost what informs the prototyping. And then at the same time, creating a document kind of like that, where it has a checklist of items that you're trying to kind of validate. And then we have a metric that gets produced, and it has like a success rate. And that actually came from Renaissance, who recently bought our company. But the metric itself was another like sort of addition that we really found gave those quantitative, gave us that quantitative data really quickly, in addition to giving us some anecdotal, like really great sort of key findings.
Great.
And it saves you time on the prototyping because you already have it kind of hammered out.
Can I ask, have you guys run into the problem of the buyer is mom or dad, and they have way different parameters than the child who's the enjoyer of the product? I feel like with the stuff that I'm working on, enormous pressure to design around stuff that I already know isn't what my customer, my non-economic customer, really actually wants. It's very frustrating.
Welcome to product development.
Definitely a few people here who can answer that, so I'm going to leave it open for somebody else.
I feel like I've been talking too much, so I'm gonna let somebody else. But if nobody truly has anything to say, I've got something to say on just about
The
anything.
only experience I can offer is we just released a game toothbrush called Game Brush earlier this year, right before COVID, perfect product launch timing. And I participated in a lot of the user testing sessions, as did Liana and some other teammates. And we had to test a range of kids from like 12 down to 5. And it was hilarious asking children to put a toothbrush in their mouth as a stranger. Just picture that one. That was really fun. But afterward, for the younger children, I would let the parents sit with them if the kids really wanted them to. And afterwards, I would actually poll the parent on a lot of the same questions that I polled the child on, and ask the parent how much they thought the product would be. And just from observing the child's interactions with it, if they thought that would ease getting the child to brush their teeth. And a lot of times the parent was bought in like immediately just by seeing how the kid interacted with the product, which hopefully will equate to a hit later. But that was maybe not the scientific way, because I'm not a certified UX researcher, but that was how I handled it, to kind of get a little bit of both sides during the session.
Thank you.
I know it. One company, we had a high-end kids product, which we figured out pretty early on meant that it was only going to be a Christmas, holiday purchase, or maybe for birthday, but not. It was even kind of outpriced for that. So it was like that was it. And so from a marketing standpoint, we got really lucky because it was so straightforward. All we had to do was get the kids really excited, and then they would tell the parents, because pretty much all parents universally have this process of deciding what that holiday gift is going to be, what that big main one. And they would literally ask their kids and have a dialogue about that. And the parents would go do the research. So we, step one was getting the kids excited by the marketing. And then step two was the correct information on the website for the parent. So that was the division of labor there. But we got really it was a very straightforward situation. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
And so all of your marketing was directed solely at the user, not the customer?
So it was divided, right? So our outward marketing. So I think we actually paid for TV time, but we had, certainly YouTube ads and did the whole social, influencers and all that sort of thing. That was 100% directed at the users, 100%. And then those kids literally would be the ones to inform the parents. And so it was one of those things where, in terms of brand exposure, because this is at a startup, so nobody knew who we were. Brand exposure, nobody in the street knew who we were unless you were a parent of the right age kid. And then you had heard of it because you had heard of it from your kid, because your kid was so excited about that ad from the influencer that they saw. So then that would make the parents, if the kid kept bugging them about it and it kept coming up on their list, their parent takes a week or 2 weeks to make sure that the 3 things on the list are really the ones that are most exciting to the kid. And I was like, fine, I'll go research. So then our website was almost 100% adult, because kids weren't doing it. It had to still resonate enough with kids if the kid was sitting there with their parent, but it was really directed at parents at that point. So then we could talk about the things that parents cared about, the safety and the whatever, and it might be educational in this way or whatever, backed by these reputable people, etc. All that stuff.
I think I'm going to suggest that maybe that's a good place to pause for now. But I wanted to just thank everybody for coming and joining and being part of this community. I'm trying to figure out a good way. If everyone just connects via LinkedIn in the group or the meetup group, we can hopefully continue this. And I'd really love to hear from you about what topics interest you for future webinars. We'd like to run something monthly if we can, given the times that we are in and how everybody's working from home. And also just the fact that I think there's a dearth of the ability to talk about these type of topics right now, specific to kids and the challenges that we are always facing. So thank you to everybody from JP and myself, Liana, Creativity, and the whole digital kids community. It's really nice meeting all of you.
Thank you for doing
it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.